art and technology, how do we usually think of these words or things? You say I'm an art person versus I'm a technology person. What do you think, Gabe?
They're on like the completely different ends of the spectrum. They have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah, completely different ends of the spectrum and nothing to do with each other. I like how it's sort of embodied on our campus, right? We have Anderson down there. That's where the art people are. Then we have Johnstone, the furthest away that you could possibly be from the arts. You have the sciences up there. They're as far away as possible. I was wondering, which of these is dominant on our campus? Would you say that Johnstone dominates Anderson, or Anderson dominates Johnstone? I mean, in terms of like the campus architecture. Well, in terms of anything, but what do you think about that? A couple thoughts, but I'd be curious to hear your perspective. Which is ascendant and which is descendant? Johnstone is higher up. It's way up there. That to me seems ascendant, right? It seems like it's dominating poor Anderson. On the other hand, yeah.
When you're up there, though, you're down to a Johnstone, and you look at Anderson, I feel like I can't look away. Like, it's such an interesting building.
Oh, so when you see it from a distance, it's interesting. What's interesting about it?
I just think the architecture, it looks nice. It looks different from every other like red brick building on campus with a green roof.
Wait, what is it? Does it have a dome?
Yes. Or
Gabe didn't like domes before. He thought domes were just okay, but now his eyes are drawn to him and he can't look away. I don't know if it has a dome or not. I mean, there's something dome-like down there. I don't know if you can actually see it. It is an interesting building. It's a captivating building, and it's at the entrance of the campus, so you could say that it has its own appeal. I was wondering what we do here in this building in between them. It's kind of interesting that this building in between the sciences and the arts is where we have our material culture, which is, I guess, what the museum might say it is. And of course, Gold has a decent amount to say about the weirdness of this term material culture. But again, this is a good indication of drawing out the modern meanings of art and technology as opposed, as in different places. I think this may have even gotten worse with the idea of STEM. But Ingold here, very interestingly, goes back to the etymology, the origins of these words, and art comes from the Latin artem or ars, and technology is from the Greek Technē. And then we read on page 349 that originally, of course, these are two different languages where we get these two words. Originally, Technē and ars meant much the same thing, namely skill of the kind associated with craftsmanship. So interestingly, the root of these two words that are said to be opposed in our modern understanding, the etymological roots indicate that they are actually the same. they are skilled craftsmanship. And there's some interesting dimensions of that. Ingold in this chapter is going to be trying to resolve or to dissolve the dichotomy between art and technology. So starting on page 351, he talks about the anthropology of art, which is the idea of analyzing basically culture as an object of study, divided from the anthropology of technology. He says on page 351 that the source of the problem lies not in the concept of art, nor in that of technology, but in the dichotomy between them. It is this, along with the idea that art floats in an ethereal realm of symbolic meaning above the physical world over which technology seeks control, that is tainted by its association with modernity. The idea would have made no sense to the craftspeople of ancient Greece or Rome. So what he is trying to get at instead is not mechanical functioning or symbolic, but skilled practice. And he has talked to us about tasks and skill, and he goes through, in some ways, perhaps a familiar treading here with the idea of skilled practice, 5 aspects of skilled practice. The first is that when we are able to practice, we bring things into use through patterns of dexterous activity. And so what he's arguing here, I mean, whenever Ingold says what he's arguing for, we have to remember what he's arguing against. And in this case, he's arguing against an idea that comes to us from Plato, or was expressed in Plato, that the mind is what directs the body. The mind is over the body and it is directing it. And he pulls out one of the more fabulous quotes, I think, from Roger Coleman, after he goes through Plato's little dialogue there, and he says, it would be wrong to assume that because Plato was a Greek, he knew what he was talking about. And he says, he was no craftsman and had no practical experience whatever of shoemaking or any other trade. I was actually, this is the first time that I tried to look for Roger Coleman's book that Ingold is quoting from, which is called The Art of Work, an Epitaph to Skill. I tried to find I couldn't find this book in any place. It doesn't seem to be really available. You can get a used copy, but Roger Coleman is a difficult person to find these days. So I couldn't even tell what this book was about. In fact, I had to try to remember what epitaph meant. If epitaph was, what an epitaph was. I don't know if you know what an epitaph is. It's that thing they put on your tombstone. It's something you say about a dead person. So I guess this book is called An Epitaph. It's like skill is dead. Or I think he's probably trying to bring it back, or to recover it against the people like Plato and the Platonic version of skill. Anyway, and Ingold's point number 1 is that we are not simply taking our body and directing it through the mind in order to be skillful. It is the pattern of skillful or dexterous activity which brings our tools and our body to use. The second point is that it is done in a total field of relations. And he brings in our buddy Gregory Bateson, the example of the skilled woods person notching with an axe the trunk of a tree. You have to consider the dynamics of the entire person axe tree system. So in other words, and here it's against what Marcel Mauss thought of skill as simply a technique of the body. You have to take into account the tree and the axe and the person. It's all together. And apparently Mauss was taking his cue explicitly from Plato. So there's Plato again. But again, Ingold is arguing that in order to understand skill, you have to understand the body, the materials, the tools all together, and that's why you need an ecological approach. Willow, you experienced this with the knitting. What happened?
I couldn't figure it out because I was just trying to watch videos and that stuff. I kept like putting it too tightly because if you don't put the yarn all the way down, it's unstick and it doesn't create like an opening. Depends on the yarn and also the needle size is wrong because I didn't know anything. And then I learned from. I actually bought my yarn and needles to Monastery because I was like, they're a little bit easier. So I predicted it, and she was excited to teach me how to knit. So
you learned with her, but then you said something about you still couldn't do it until she said, what'd she say about this, the yarn or something?
like the tension is how much tension you need is variable, and you kind of have to like just feel like how it needs to be.
You have to feel like what the yarn is telling you to do or something. How the yarn wants to be.
Yeah, that's what she kind of said.
Oh my gosh, it was like she was reading Ingold and was channeling it, or maybe it's because of all these things that Ingold is doing is simply bringing back the common sense in his own weird writing way, because he has to get through all this other stuff that people have said that is not common sense. I'm not sure if common sense is what I want, but you know, yeah, the idea that you ask the materials what they would want to be. Ask that brick what it wants to be. It says an arch, a dome. It wants to be a dome. Third point on page 353, that you need care, judgment, dexterity, attentive. You watch and feel as you work. That's what Willow was experiencing. And they are always responding to the ever-changing conditions. He cites here the nature and art of workmanship. Too many guys in here. It finally gets the Telefol, women and girls, but there's a little too gendered for doing all this weaving and knotting. But as a continual response to changing conditions, also cites a really interesting study by the Russian neuroscientist Nikolai Bernstein, argued some 50 years ago. So that would have been maybe in the 1950s. Boy, Russians were really bad back then, but now they were okay for a while and now they're terrible again. But anyway, the Russian neuroscientist is looking at the hammer, the skilled blacksmith, and what he finds out is the skilled blacksmith, I don't know how the skilled blacksmith does this, but it can always hit the same spot over and over. But what he discovered is it's not because the arm is moving the same, it's because the arm is sort of ever changing in order to hit that spot. So you have to be like continually correcting what Bernstein called sensory corrections as you're moving that hammer. Very difficult to do. That's why I was never very good at chopping wood. Same thing, you have to be able to hit that axe right in the thing. And so fourth point is that obviously if is requires skilled dexterity and movement, you can't just kind of tell somebody how to do it. It can't be reduced to a formula, and it's really difficult to do it from drawings and blueprints, which is what Ingold and his buddies discovered when they tried to do some knots. They just couldn't do it. It was trial and error. Or here's what we'll be talking about in a second, the diagram of the Telefol string bag. Let's make one of those. Think you can do it? No, it'd be a total jumbled mess. Be embarrassed to even try, right? It would be terrible. But this is the looping skills. And so it's very difficult to make these kinds to tell people how to do these things. Found this out. You ever try to teach a kid how to tie their shoes? How do you even learn how to how did you learn how to tie your shoes? The only thing I could do is stand there and say, just tie your shoes, just do it. I mean, I guess you show them, you do it. Some people, anyway, he actually mentions, like there's in the middle of page 357, like most commonplace practical skills such as tying shoelaces in Western society, looping resists codification in the form of generative rules or algorithms. It's very difficult to, you just have to keep trying. And I don't think my kids tie their shoes like I tie my shoes. I don't know where they learned. Can't understand. But, you have to be actively guided or active reinvention of these skills. Now, certainly in Ingold's day, you had these diagrams and people would try to tell you what to do, and you could either do it in person. Today we have this wonderful thing called YouTube. And I have learned a ton on YouTube, but Willie, you said it didn't help you, YouTube.
No, because I could see which they were doing, but I could replicate it. Like I could see it and see where it was going in, but I just couldn't figure it out. I was still doing it way too tightly, and then nobody can tell you what you're doing wrong when you're just watching it.
I guess I feel like YouTube is sometimes like the older guardians that I didn't necessarily have. You can always go on and they'll be like, here's how to tie a knot. Here's how to teach your kid how to ride a bicycle. That's coming up, how to ride a bicycle. Do you know how to teach kids how to ride bicycles? It's a life skill. How do you learn how to ride a bicycle? Falling over a lot. Yeah, that's how I was taught how to ride a bicycle. Parent took me to the top of the hill, pushed me, fall down, get back up. I had so many bruises on me. My mom thought I was going to be taken to Child Protective Services. You got to take me away. I didn't want my kids to go through that, that sounds terrible. So we tried the training wheels thing. I don't know if you've tried that, the training wheels. Kid zips off, they're like, great. You're like, oh, great, kid, training wheels, this is great. And then you take the training wheels off and they just fall over again. It's terrible. You're like, well, and there's these people who are like, yeah, you just take the training wheels up a little bit at a time. No, they just fall over. So actually, though, YouTube taught me the way to teach a kid how to ride a bicycle, and now the Germans have balance bikes too. You actually take, if you don't want to buy one of those expensive balance bikes, you take the pedals off. And so if you take the pedals off, the kid learns how to balance the bike and can kind of learn to glide it along without falling over too much. Then you put the pedals on and they're good. It was amazing. It was incredible. But that said, I don't know. I don't know if you can learn knitting, obviously. But I feel like YouTube sometimes can help us bridge that gap between, you know, the directions and this diagram and the actual doing of it. But maybe not. Maybe you need somebody to put your hands on top of your shoelaces and just tie them up. So, and then finally for his fifth point, we're going into some other stuff. It's the activity that generates the form. So this was kind of a slight debate that we had in the last class. Is the activity generating the form, not the preceding design. And I think it's not that there is no such thing as a design. It's not that the design doesn't matter. It's not that the idea doesn't matter. It's just that regardless of whether you have the idea or not in your head or in a piece of paper or in a recipe or rules, it's the actual doing it itself that produces the thing, not the recipe or the idea or the design. I'm trying to think, has anybody used 3D printers much? No. Yeah, I mean, sometimes those have to be super designed. I was looking at people who, those have a certain trial and error function too, and in them, they actually often print messes if you don't know what you're doing. But I'm not a 3D printer either. It's just an interesting way in which we try to make these 3D blueprints, but in some ways they still end up there's a lot of trial and error involved. So it's the activity that generates the form. And this brings us then to these wonderful string bags of the Telefol from and Ingold is here drawing on Maureen Mackenzie's work, Androgynous Objects, String Bags and Gender in Central New Guinea. There's looks like a little kid in a string bag, and there's a link to some, and they had a threat on there. If I reproduce those images, I might get in trouble, but you can see string bags in various museums and things like that. But Ingold spends a lot of time here. And I remember in the last class, I said that this would help answer like how things were passed on from generation to generation. Ingold is arguing against the idea that what we pass on is an idea or a rule or a specification, which is then internalized and reproduced. So instead, he's arguing here for a process of, on page 356, guided rediscovery. So a guided rediscovery in which the role of experience makers is to set up the context within which novices are enabled to gain in proficiency for themselves. And so, just a lot of really interesting ways in which people are, would try to practice and you can't really explain it to people, but you have to set up these tasks in which people you are progressively able to find out for yourself or to rediscover for yourself the way in which these principles operate. I think hopefully a good example of how skills are not necessarily passed, but are continually rediscovered in each generation with modification, but also with remarkable fidelity to what has come before. We then turn to the birds, the weaver bird. birds and the birds' nests that the weaver bird is able to make. And I should have copied also this diagram on page 359, which has a loop tuck, a simple loop, interlocking loops, a spiral coil, a simple weave, alternately reversed winding, half hitch, overhand knot, and a slip knot, none of which I can probably make on my own. But there they are. That's what the weaver birds are doing. All kinds of different stitches and fastenings and knots. And it's kind of incredible. And so in Telefol society, it's both boys and girls start out kind of messing around with the materials to make net bags, but only the girls proceed and the boys go off and start doing different things. And in the case of the weaver birds, both male and female weaver birds start out kind of messing around with little sticks and stuff. They're not born able to do this. They have to practice. At first, both females and males do it, but then the females go off and do their own thing. And the males keep practicing. And as Ingold says on 359, experiments showed that birds deprived of opportunities to practice and denied access to suitable materials are subsequently unable to build adequate nests or even to build at all. Indeed, fiddling about with potential nest material appears to be just as essential for the bird in preparing itself for future building, as are the first experience of Telefolman toddlers in roving and spinning shredded fibers for their future billum making. So you have these birds, they're not born with it. In both cases, you have, in one case, you have the females and males, and the females continue to do it. In the other case, the birds, the females and males start, but only the males continue to do it. They have to practice, and then eventually they get good at it. And in the words of Collius and Collius, those people sound like they might be married to each other. They were studying these young male weavers, and they said that you'd have to say that they learn judgment on page 360. Then, as Ingold rather wryly observes, one can sense the reluctance with which these hard-nosed empirical observers find themselves having to resort to a notion of this kind. But the evidence leaves them with no alternative. That is to say, they just wanted to do their scientific observation, but they have to say that these birds seem to be using judgment. And in fact, if you click on this garden design website, you can see various crazy weaver bird nests. We don't have these around here, but you can get one. It's interesting, they call them garden designs. Again, that notion of design, but the textile in the trees by the weaver bird. The implications of this comparison are pretty, I would say, incredible, or I don't know, earth-shattering. That's not too big of a word. Mind-blowing, that's a better word. At least for those of us who've grown up with this division between what we consider to be the biological and the cultural, or between the inherited and the acquired. Both of those lines start to get really blurry here. This is on page 360. Recall that Telefol girls develop their looping skills at a time of life when their bodies are also undergoing rapid growth. So they're being toddlers and they're starting to play with the stuff and they're starting to diligently work at it and they're getting better and working and practicing. These skills then, far from being added on to a preformed body, actually grow with it. You should really start knitting when you're about like 4 years old, right? Then you can, I mean, all the skills are better. It's better to start the earlier, you know, if you really want to be a good guitar player, start early. Not that we can't learn later on, but it's always nice to grow with the skills. In that regard, they are fully part and parcel of the human organism, of its neurology, musculature, even anatomy, and so are as much biological as cultural. So these skills become part of our developing body, and they become part of our biology too. Again, humans are relatively unique in that we stay younger, you might say, for a longer time and are able to start knitting at an older age and still carry it through until you can be an expert at that as well. But it's always nice to get a good start when you're 3 or 4 years old on these things. And then you can have it grow into your developing body. Of course, then if you change your mind and hate knitting, it's harder to change up. But let's see. So, I mean, Ingold is basically saying that the skills are biological as much as they are cultural, and it's the same with the weaver bird, which the knotting and looping skills are the same, and any skill, human or non-human. Moreover, one could just as well claim that such skills are innate, in the sense that so long as the necessary environmental conditions are in place, including having some people who know what they're doing, they are more or less bound to develop. All Telefol girls learn to make string bags, just as they all learn to walk or to speak. All male weaver birds learn to make nests unless opportunities for practice are artificially removed. Conversely, Telefol boys and female weaver birds never develop full-blown looping and weaving skills, since their respective activities and concerns take them too soon into other fields of practice. So basically, Ingold is saying here that, in fact, if the skills are going to develop in that environment, and so the line between innate and acquired is not as clear as you might think. Now, I believe not too long ago in this class, I actually already showed us this because Willa asked about the difference between human skills and the skills of non-human animals, such as the weaver bird. And Ingold says here on page 361 that I do not pretend to know, doesn't know the difference. I remain perplexed by the question and have yet to find an answer that is wholly convincing. The one thing that he says that is different, what the bird does not do, as far as we know, is to tie these different strands of perception and action together. If birds were human, they would say that the good weaver is one whose beak seems to fly, just as Telefol say that the skilled looper is one whose hands flow. So what the birds don't do, they do all these wonderful things and they can have skills, but they don't tie the action together with the perception. If they could, they might say that the beak flies, but they do not do this. Human beings, it seems, differ from other animals in that they are peculiarly able to treat the manifold threads of experience as material for further acts of weaving and looping, thereby creating intricate patterns of metaphorical connection. And this is generally done in the idioms of speech and storytelling. And so what the birds can't seem to do is to tie these threads together in perception and action and do storytelling and imagine new things that you can do with that bird's nest. That's what humans can do. Ingold will go on to say that speech is a skill as well. And like all skills, it has to be done in practice and exhibits all those 5 attributes of skill. But it's no ordinary skill. Weaving together in narrative the multiple strands of action and perception specific to diverse tasks and situations, it serves, if you will, as the skill of skills. Skill of skills, the thing that brings all these different strands of action perception together. So speech, and we'll be reading more about speech and hopefully tying it into some of our linguistic anthropology as we go along, but you have a preliminary answer to how humans and non-human animals have skills, how those are transmitted, and where the perception, action, and metaphor come in. So it's pretty down to earth chapter, but it's pretty amazing too. The last time I taught this course, I found that you could buy one of these string bags. This one you could buy. I don't know how they took it away from the wandering shaman. It seems kind of mean. Seems super mean. How much would you pay for this? Yeah, you can't. I mean, I don't know. What you can do whatever you want with it if you buy it. It's for the serious collector. That should give you a clue. Might be going up, inflation. They said that this one had been sold for $675. I think that's a little cheap on that one. Yeah, that's cool. So that was what I found, is that you could buy. This was kind of disturbing in its own way. This time around, I found some more on Etsy. How much would you pay for that? It's a natural fiber Billum bag. They said on Etsy that sometimes it takes them a month to make one of these. They had a couple pictures of the people in, I guess they're still there doing these. I thought you were supposed to. That's what I don't know. It wasn't clear to me. It wasn't clear to me where this was coming from, but there it is. No, there it is. It says organic PNG, organic Papua New Guinea. They bought it from somebody. They're going to sell it to you on Etsy. This one is relatively inexpensive. A mere, there's only one available, but less than $90. That was, didn't look as good as the other one though. Huh? No, that's not from a wandering shaman. That's just something you sell to the people that are coming through town. Looks like it might fall apart. Well, no, it's sturdy. It's sturdy, I'm sure. I shouldn't. I mentioned this because there's an interesting part on page 357 where Telefol women, according to Mackenzie, place great value on the standardization of their looping techniques. This is a way of confirming tribal identity. So it's interesting because standardization is something we usually ascribe to that of industry. And I can't help wondering, well, now that it's on Etsy, I was looking on Amazon for these, I couldn't find any yet. But you know, what happens when I start being able to just buy these on like Walmart? Everybody wants a bill and string bag, and all of a sudden I've standardized it down and I got a bunch of people working for me in a little factory. All those little toddlers stringing, looping, getting their fibers together, passing it on to their mom. Doesn't sound so fun anymore. Not good. Yeah, I mean, this is the issue, right? A lot of these skills and techniques and things and that are passed along then get uptaked into, put into the capitalist system when they start to acquire value. And those toddlers going along doing their practice it's looking more like we need to get our child